innovation towards realizing the South African constitutional water rights. First and foremost, I would like to extend a warm welcome and sincere thanks to our esteemed speakers of today, including Professor Michael Kidd from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Ms. Karen Bosman from Karen Bosman Sustainable Solutions, Mr. Jacques de Vos from Mezzanine, and Mr. Jay Bagwan from the Water Research Commission. We are very excited to have you here today, and we look forward to what I am sure will be an insightful and fruitful event on this important and topical issue. Unfortunately, Professor Nathan Cooper is unable to attend today due to the sudden national lockdown in New Zealand that has left him without access to reliable internet. Nonetheless, Professor Cooper has done invaluable research on the real-world application of water technologies towards addressing water services and water resource challenges. As such, I will briefly reflect on his research during our first session of today.
Where's my camera? How do I?
Please mute yourself, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you. Then I would like to welcome Professor Anal du Plessis, the chairholder at CLES, Dr. Harmari Viljoen, a senior lecturer at the Northwest University's Faculty of Law, and Ms. Melandri Steenkamp, a PhD researcher at CLES, who have graciously agreed to facilitate the 3 sessions of the colloquium. Thank you very much for your time and trouble. Finally, to all of our participants, welcome and thank you for your interest and for taking the time to participate and be a part of the discussion. We really value your virtual presence. Now, before continuing to Professor Anal du Plessis, I would just like to sketch a brief background about this colloquium. Now, as mentioned on the program, the COVID-19 pandemic continues to highlight the urgent water reality in South Africa. However, of course, this reality is not new at all, and is especially prominent to those persons who still lack access to sufficient water, despite the Constitution of South Africa ensuring the progressive realization of this right in Section 27. This reality includes a multitude of challenges concerning water service delivery and water resource management, all of which have to be taken in the context of South Africa being an extremely water-scarce country. Already overburdened, municipalities have the constitutionally entrenched function to provide water services to communities. And given this function, municipalities are key towards realizing everyone's right to access to sufficient water. Yet they face extensive and often perplexing issues in this regard. These include contextually relevant issues such as socioeconomic disparities in the country and widespread and systemic poverty, climate change, urbanization, and geographically unequal water availability and demand. It also encompasses water service delivery challenges such as lost or stolen water, known as non-revenue water, the sustainability of water infrastructure and services they provide, and the availability of data about water services that may affect municipalities' capability to conduct proper planning and effective decision-making. Consequently, we are left with a need to investigate, for instance, the challenges that form a part of the access to water debate. We need to look at how water resource management and proper data collection and control may have an impact on the right of access to water, as well as innovative approaches such as technologies that may aid in the realization of the constitutional water right. Now, this colloquium intends to provide a platform where these questions can be discussed and will therefore consist of the following 3 sessions. Session 1, of course, is focused on the introduction to issues in the access to water debate, whereas Session 2 concerns water resource management, data, and its impact on the right of access to water. And the final session will explore water services delivery, intelligent water management technologies, and the right of access to water. Now, the theme of this colloquium was inspired by my PhD thesis and the research thereon, titled The Realization of the Constitutional Water Right in South African Cities Through Intelligent Water Management Technologies. And this was conducted under the CLES chair and under the supervision of our CLES chair holder, Professor Anal du Plessis. Without further ado, I would like to welcome and introduce Professor du Plessis to tell us more about the prestigious SADC CLES chair. Prof, please proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicolene, and good morning, everyone. I can see in our list of participants that I can actually say good morning, friends. Many people familiar to me, and I would like to extend a welcome to every participant, even if it's your first time joining a CLES event. I am grateful that you've set aside some time on this Friday morning and early afternoon to join us for this colloquium that explores how technology and innovation can assist us in realizing the right of access to sufficient water that belongs to everyone in South Africa. So up front, I would also like to sincerely thank our presenters. We literally have all the experts in the virtual room today, and I look very much forward to the discussion. The research agenda of the South African Research Chair in Cities, Law and Environmental Sustainability, CLES for short, considers the legally relevant nexus between urbanization, urban development, the pressures caused by global environmental change, the protection of socio-ecological systems, and the relevant fields of law. So one of the obvious areas of law is environmental law, and more specifically, water law. And the chair is the academic home of a couple of final year LLB students, master's students, PhD students, and also postdoctoral fellows. And quite a few of them are working on theses that explore aspects of water security and water rights protection and advancement. And as you've heard, Nicolene just recently completed her PhD thesis in this area as well. And all of these researchers are funded by the National Research Foundation of South Africa. If you will allow me, I would just like to indicate also that today's theme is not only interesting from the perspective of new opportunities and innovative solutions for environmental law and governance, as posed by the fourth industrial revolution, sensor-driven and e-governance, ICTs, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, and the slow but visible transition to smart cities. Today's discussion and probably also future research in this area have to really deeply engage with the possibilities as well as the risks that technology holds for governance and equal provision of a scarce natural resource, water, and the fact that in South Africa we are faced with uneven water scarcity, which is only going to be intensified by climate change. Our challenge in South Africa and many parts of the world, especially also other African countries, is that we should feed more people with lesser water in a context of climate change and growing energy demand, while maintaining healthy ecosystems. And that is quite a tall order. This means that we cannot decouple water, food, energy, and land demands. No matter the potential of the best technologies in the world, we cannot create new water. And we cannot, and water, as we know, sustains life, and it also sustains economies. So if water resource allocations are not properly addressed, trade-offs instead of synergies in water management and allocation across different groups and sectors have the potential to create unintended negative consequences, risks and uncertainties that could affect large populations, and in our country specifically, those living in marginalized and poor communities. And this is, in my view, exactly the opposite of the intention of Section 27 of the Constitution. So in my view, in our collective exploration and experimentation with technologies for improved water governance and access to water, we should also bear in mind ahistorical and generalizable technological solutions that sometimes lack socioeconomic and political context, to the extent that it tends to offer a neutral one-size-fits-all fix. There's corporate governance alliances instead of community input that may lead to technocratic governance at all spheres. And that is, of course, known to threaten local democracy. We sit with privatization and corporatization of the water services function that could lead to competition for highest profit instead of the pursuit of the greater good and long-term water security. And that at the moment, we do face the risk that some technologies may reinforce existing digital divides and power asymmetries instead of helping to eradicate socioeconomic divisions, especially in South African cities and a growing number of poor and poorly serviced informal settlements. So on behalf of CLES, I invite you to enjoy and actively participate in today's event. Water is directly relevant to all of us, and while the constitutional right was designed to sustainably protect everyone in the country and generations of future South Africans to come, the right is at threat, and we do hope and anticipate that technology might help us in protecting our interests that we have in water. Thank you very much, Nicoline. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Professor du Plessis. What a wonderful introduction. I will now run through some housekeeping rules to follow for the duration of this event. Firstly, we request that participants switch off their cameras to save data and only switch on your cameras during the Q&A sessions should you wish to pose a question to the speakers. Secondly, all participants are to keep their microphones off until we request for you to raise your hand during the Q&A or when you are called upon to speak. Kindly remember to switch it off afterwards and lower your hand once your question has been answered. Feel free to use the chat function to post questions to the speakers during their presentations. We encourage active participation during the Q&A, and thus our facilitators may pose your questions to the speakers at such times. Please keep in mind that this colloquium is being recorded, and by remaining logged into this event now, we accept that you consent to its recording. Additionally, we will be generating an attendance list for sponsorship compliance purposes, but the list will not be shared for any other reason. Now, finally, while we are very grateful for the opportunity digital platforms provide us to continue academic discussions of this kind, we would like to request your patience should any technical difficulties occur. We have speakers from across the country, and although we do not anticipate any issues such as internet connectivity, it remains a possibility and reality for virtual events. Now, it is my pleasure to give the proverbial floor back to our facilitator for session 1, Professor Arnaud du Plessis, and our first speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicoline. So for the next short of an hour, we will be busy with section 1, or session 1 rather, and you've just seen there up on the screen that we have in the lineup Professor Michael Keat. And as explained earlier by Nicoline, we unfortunately do not have Nathan Cooper with us today. But what Nicoline was as kind to prepare is a short response to some of the work that Nathan Cooper has been doing, his publications in the field of technologies and innovation for the realization of the water right, and his research specifically focused on South Africa, even though he is not from South Africa. But first up then, we have Professor Michael Keat. And Michael, I am delighted to have you here today. CV as long as my arm, and we've also known each other for quite a few years. But for the rest of the audience, I can just say that Prof. Michael Keat, in my view, is one of the fathers, even though he's not very old, or grandfathers then, of environmental law in South Africa, and he takes a keen interest in water law. You can see that from his list of publications, his involvement in many associations. He's edited books on the topic. He's the editor of the South African Journal of Environmental Law and Policy. He supervised a great many students, 40 plus from other African countries. And Michael has definitely left deep footsteps on the development of environmental law and water law in the country. So Michael, we look forward to your intervention and your presentation this morning. And thank you very much. You are all the way from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, Faculty of Law, and we look forward to hearing your message. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Anel. and I'm really delighted to have been invited to talk to you this morning. It is something that I've worked on, and I'm quite passionate about issues relating to the right of access to water, as well as other water law issues. Just by way of introduction, before I get on to the substance, those of you who are looking at the list of the participants will see that I'm identified as Elizabeth Kidd. For some reason, I logged in as my daughter, and I think that's a residue of having to use Microsoft Teams to speak to her teachers and log in using her ID. So I just haven't unlogged. So hopefully she doesn't cut me off at some stage. But I'm Michael Kidd, not Elizabeth Kidd. Secondly, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation because my experience with talking on these electronic platforms is that if one shares a screen, one ends up talking to one's PowerPoint presentation, which I don't really find very very convenient. So I do have a document that I am going to finalize after this morning, and I will send to the organizers. So if anybody wants the information that I was talking about, that can be distributed with pleasure. But you'll just have to listen to me for now. And then finally, as I said, I'm really interested in this particular topic. And there's probably a good possibility that I could carry on talking longer than the time that I've been allocated. I haven't timed what I have to say, so I would be really grateful if the facilitators can just let me know how I'm going in terms of time. So what I want to do really is before we get on to the technology and the innovation, which are obviously very important aspects in relation to access to water, is really to sketch the issues that require the technology and the innovation. So it's all very well saying we've got technology, we've got innovation, but we need to know what the issues are that we have to address using that technology and innovation. And I think, unfortunately, perhaps there are a number of issues in relation to access to water in South Africa that are crying out for some kind of treatment or redress using technology and innovation if necessary. So I want to start off really by contextualizing it in terms of the South African Constitution, in terms of Section 27. Everyone has the right to have access to sufficient food and water, and the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures within its available resources to achieve the progressive realization of each of these rights. So when we're talking about the right of access to water, it's, if anybody thinks about it, obviously not something that can be realized immediately, particularly in respect to those people who have not had adequate access to water in the past. Because it requires infrastructure which costs money and takes time to install and so on. So it has to be realized in a progressive way. And I'll be talking more about the progressive realization aspect as we go along. So within that context, I've identified certain questions. So there are a variety of levels at which we can look at the right of access to water. And these different levels raise the various issues that we need to think about in relation to how we introduce technology and innovate in order to address them. So the first question to ask is how much water and what water is available for meeting human needs? And the first question, sub-question under that is how much water? And as has already been pointed out in the introductory comments, we, in many parts of the country, are already experiencing shortages of water, and not just as a result of the periodic climatic conditions and the droughts that come and go in the country, but really pervasive shortages. And throughout the country as a whole, shortages are projected going into the future. So there are current shortages, there's population growth, there's increasing urbanization and climate change. And all of these will contribute to an increasing situation of water scarcity where there isn't already water scarcity. And in that respect, we clearly need to look at augmentation of water supply. And there are a number of possibilities in that regard, not just importing water from neighboring countries, but also desalinization, which is extremely expensive and also has negative environmental impacts, but also aspects such as recharge of aquifers and recycling of water. I know in Namibia, a lot of the water that is used there is recycled, and we really just need to get over in many parts of the country the yuck factor in relation to recycled water. But a lot of people are really misinformed in that respect, because I know that there are a couple of people I saw in the participants who come from Durban. People in Durban are drinking water that we in Maritzburg have already drunk already. So recycling water is nothing new. The second aspect in relation to the water that is available for human needs is the water quality. And we have enormous water quality issues in South Africa. I won't mention anything more about them at the moment. But obviously water quality has an impact in relation to the water that can be supplied to people for human needs. Many of the water purification works are not designed for the amount of impurities that are coming into them. And this looks like it will only get worse. In relation to the right of access to water, the question how much is a very important question. And in terms of current South African legislation, regulations under the Water Services Act that came out in 2001, the current standard is 25 litres per person per day within 200 meters of a household. There are some other requirements as well in that regulation, but I won't go through them in detail here. Now, in many respects, there'll be many critics and scholars who will suggest that 25 litres per person per day is not really adequate. It's adequate if you're talking about staying alive, but any kind of dignified existence would probably require quite a lot more than 25 litres per person per day. As I said earlier, in relation to providing access to water, the state is required to progressively realize the right in terms of Section 27 of the Constitution. In the well-known Masubuko case, the argument was raised that the court should set a minimum core requirement, but the court, following its precedent in the Grootboom case, which dealt with the right to housing, said that it wasn't up for the court to determine that amount, and that was something for the executive to determine. So it rejected the minimum core requirement, but reinforced the idea that progressive realization was the standard by which to provide water, and that had to be reasonable. So progressive realization does require some kind of progress, as the name would suggest. There are also norms and standards to provide for progressive realization. These appeared in 2017, and the idea broadly is that there'll be some kind of ladder where one climbs up the ladder to a situation at the top where one has water in one's house, and if one is able to afford that, and I'll get back to that later as well, that amount of water will be more than the minimum of 25 litres. So the next level that I want to look at, and this in many respects will determine the sorts of innovations that are required, are the different categories of people that exist in South Africa in relation to the right to water. And the first category are those people who have no access and have never had access. So it doesn't mean that they're not using water, because otherwise they'd be dead. But they're basically accessing water from their own initiative, either from streams or rivers or wells that they might have sunk or whatever. And I'll say a bit more about that in a second. So these are people that are not hooked up to government infrastructure in relation to water reticulation. So according to the 2019 Stats South Africa General Household Survey, which is the most recent of those surveys, it was published in December 2020. In 2002, the percentage of households with access to piped or tap water in their dwellings, either off-site or on-site, was 84.4%. In 2011, it reached a high of 90.3% and has declined year by year to a level of 88.2% in 2019. So some of these households then would not be in the category of people who've never had access to water. They have had access to water, but they've dropped off and now don't have access to water. So that's one of the other categories that I'll be talking about shortly. So I'll just read a paragraph from that survey. An estimated 44.9% of households had access to piped water in their dwellings in 2019. 44.9. A further 28.5% accessed water on site, while 12.2% relied on communal taps and 2.5% relied on neighbors' taps. Although generally households' access to water improved, 3.1% of households still had to fetch water from rivers, streams, stagnant water pools, dams, wells, and springs in 2019. Now, I know that says 3.1% of households, but I would assume that that is a similar percentage to overall population. So 3.1% of 60 million, I didn't do the arithmetic beforehand, but that's still a significant number of people. So that would, I think, be about 1.8 million people, unless my arithmetic is off, and it has been in recent days, and I can't explain that. Where are the areas lacking access? These are largely rural or semi-rural areas, in many cases former so-called homelands areas. And then in the urban environment, urban informal settlements, for a variety of reasons, don't have adequate access. Many of them, intuitively, you would realize why that is a problem. So the first category are those people who haven't had access to water. The second category are those where access to water is restricted. And there are a number of subcategories that can be identified in relation to this section. Firstly, those where the access is restricted deliberately. And there are at least two reasons for this. The first is where the access is restricted for operational reasons, such as maintenance. This is supposed to be temporary. And it is regulated in terms of regulations under the Water Services Act. So where there is a break in supply, that supply is supposed to be addressed within a certain amount of time. And if it is not, then alternative measures such as water tankers have to be set on. But as we can see, this isn't always the case. The second reason why there might be deliberate restriction of water is because of non-payment. And I'm going to talk about the payment issue in more detail later on, because that raises a number of quite controversial and important issues in relation to the right of access to water. Then there are the restrictions and access to water that we might refer to as non-deliberate. In other words, somebody didn't plan for the restriction. The first, which is unfortunately more common than we would like to see, arises where there's infrastructural breakdown, and that is often because of lack of maintenance, and there are a whole lot of reasons why that doesn't happen. Second would be where there's some kind of unexpected emergency situation. So in an urban environment, it might be that something that I experienced last year, the people putting in the internet fiber cut through the water line. Or it might be such as what happened in Carolina a few years ago, where there is a spillage from a mine that then infects the dam that supplies water to a particular town. And then, of course, there's the slow onset situations such as drought, which in many cases we would probably argue should be able to be planned for. But as we've seen in many parts of the country, that planning leaves a lot to be desired. And then the third category of people in relation to the right of access to water would be those who do have access to water. And just to repeat the figures that I mentioned in relation to the 2019 General Household Survey, 73.4% altogether have water on site. But of that, only 44.9%. So it's not 44.9% of the 73%, but 44.9% of the total 100%. 44.9% have water in their dwellings. And you'll recall I was talking about the norms and standards that envisaged the ladder earlier on. So if we think of the ladder, as involving people at the bottom with no access to water and people at the top with water in their dwellings, the idea is that people would move up that ladder. So when we're talking about the right of access to water, it's not just a case of ensuring that people who don't have water do have water, and that would be the priority, but also that people who are further up the ladder, so for example, people who have water on site but not in their dwellings, they would be able to move up the ladder as well to being in a position where they have water within their dwellings. So it's not just a case of saying you've got access to water now. In terms of the standards, there's nothing more that we as the state have to do. It obviously requires ongoing commitments, and that realization, or that progressive realization, is probably something that will continue to have to be realized as time goes on. I mentioned earlier that I was going to talk about payments later, and I'll get onto that now. So in terms of the current, what could be labeled neoliberal approach to provision of services, including provision of water, and bearing in mind obviously that providing access to water is not a costless exercise. It's not simply a case of saying there's the river, go and get some water. It involves obviously putting in quite a sophisticated infrastructural system, then maintaining that system and making sure that the system works, so that the pumps are working and so on and so forth. So it costs money, and the idea is that people consuming water must then pay for those costs. There are a number of people who argue quite vociferously against the neoliberal paradigm, and I'm not going to go into that in more detail now, and that's not because I don't agree with those arguments, but because we don't really have time to get into that debate here. But obviously the biggest problem with requiring consumers to pay for water is that there are a number of consumers who are not unwilling, that's a separate story, but unable to pay for water. And we need to look at ways of addressing access to water for those people. And in that respect, the government has the free basic water system, which is introduced or implemented in slightly different ways in different municipal areas. But essentially, the way that it works generally is that the free basic water allowance looks at providing enough water to meet the 25 litres per person per day criterion for a household of 8 people. So it's 6,000 kilolitres per month. Now, one of the immediate problems that arises in that respect is that if the household consists of more than 8 people, then those people are not having access to water that meets the standard set out in 2001. In the Masubuko case, for example, the plaintiff and her household encompassed 20 people living on that plot. So a significantly larger number than the water provided for 8 people for a month. So we have to think of effective ways of addressing the issue of indigence and people who are not able to pay for water. And obviously the one-size-fits-all approach is inadequate in that regard, because where the household is in excess of 8 people, as we've seen, there are problems. I think the Constitutional Court gave too much emphasis to the City of Johannesburg's arguments that administratively it would be too difficult to ascertain exactly how many people there are in a household, and that for that reason the blanket rule had to apply to all. I'm not convinced by that argument, and that might well be one of the areas in which technology and innovation would be very useful. It's not just a case of, in relation to payments of indigence, that is a problem. One of the problems that municipalities throughout the country are having to deal with, and this probably wouldn't just be a case in South Africa, but throughout the world, the instance of so-called non-revenue water. And there are at least 2 reasons why non-revenue water would be a problem. The first is leaks. And in many parts of the country, the amount of water that is lost in the system through leaks of various types is far in excess of the norms that are regarded as acceptable internationally. So there's a huge amount of water that is being wasted. And then secondly, what one finds in many parts of the country are that many consumers are hooked up to the infrastructure. In other words, they are part of the reticulation system and they have water in many cases in their households, but have never been billed. So there are problems in relation to ensuring that people who are receiving water, even where they are able to pay for that water, are in fact being billed for that water and being paid for it. Now, I know that there are a number of, let's call them political, social, socio-economic issues that would have to be addressed in relation to the culture, if you want to call it that, of non-payment. And I'm not sure to what extent technology will be able to address those, but maybe it will. But that clearly is something that needs to be addressed in relation to ensuring that there's enough money to provide for access to water. And then the final aspect that I want to talk about that I think would be relevant in relation to technology and innovation, or any changes in the way that access to water is provided to consumers, and that is that we mustn't forget procedural fairness. Procedural fairness was an issue that was raised in Masubuko. Once again, I'm not convinced that the court got it right in that case on the facts, but clearly where there are going to be changes in the way that consumers receive their water or pay their water or similar, they would have to be consulted and have meaningful participation in the way that those innovations and technological interventions are provided for. So hopefully that sets the scene, and I'm not being too presumptuous when I say that's what I'm doing, but obviously I'm willing to hear and attempt to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Prof. Keat, Michael, thank you very much for that comprehensive overview of the realities we are facing in relation to not only the availability of water, but also the status of access to water across the country. It's great that we can have those stats. It might even look slightly worse than the stats that we have. If you will allow me, I'm going to give Nicoline an opportunity to just briefly give us a sense of the work of Nathan Cooper, and then we will transition into the Q&A, for which I invite participants to prepare so long. Thanks, Mike. Nicoline, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor du Plessis and Professor Kidd, for your very important insights and for raising such a vast set of issues. I think, if I may, just make a few comments on what you've said, and then I'll proceed to Professor Nathan Cooper's research. I just think that the specificity you are alluding to as to what exactly we want to achieve when we talk about realizing the constitutional water right, specifically access to adequate water or sufficient water, is to me an immensely important point of inquiry. And in terms of your remarks on the different categories of persons who have or do not have access to water and the level of access to water that they have, this is a particular area where I think technology and innovation could play an important role, especially regarding managing maintenance and water services off times, as well as emergency and unexpected infrastructure issues. And this, of course, is where the integration of information and communication technologies, or ICTs, paired with the Internet of Things, data science, and predictive analytics could potentially reduce the massive impact that these issues have on persons' continuous access to water. Now, some of these technologies obviously are already in place in certain cities, and it includes apps and advanced monitoring systems. But the thing you were saying rings true to me, and especially when we have to seek out technological and innovative solutions to realize the right to water, it might be somewhat frivolous if we do not consider exactly what we want these technologies to achieve. And I really agree with your sentiments there. And the Masubuko case avoided doing just that, providing clarity as to what is meant by sufficient access to water, and rather focusing on the progressive realization of the aspect. Again, the case also exemplified the situation that even when water-related legislation and policies are fully implemented, the quantity of the water provided may still be insufficient to satisfy the basic needs of some of the impoverished households. And then, yes, we cannot ignore that the Masubuko case is highly relevant within the context of this colloquium's theme, considering it was centered on the City of Johannesburg's free basic water policy and the installation of prepaid water meters by the City of Johannesburg, which, brought on very serious and unintended consequences, particularly regarding the technological intervention. So the prepaid water meter. The Constitutional Court determined that the prepaid water meter system was not unfairly discriminatory, and that the allocation of 6 kiloliters water per household was fair. But the case did highlight the risks and possible unintended consequences of the use of technology to help advance the fulfillment of the right to access to sufficient water. But coming back to Professor Nathan Cooper's research, which I really hoped he could have presented to us today personally. I can't speak on his behalf, but I found a recent chapter contribution Professor Cooper made to the book Emergent Technologies and International Security, Machines, the State and War, quite relevant for this colloquium. His chapter pertained the disrupting paradigms through new technologies, assessing the potential of smart water points to improve water security for marginalized communities. And according to Professor Cooper, advancements in water technology offer the possibility of achieving reliable, sustainable, and equitable water services for users in marginalized communities, but at the same time, they represent a disruption to established relationships vis-a-vis water management. So the connection between secure access to sufficient, safe water and healthy and productive life to Professor Cooper seems obvious, and as is the inverse connection between insecure and insufficient water access, ill health and poverty. So the responsibility for and the governance of water resources in the village or the urban area actually that he was investigating, it was in the Serekunda villages, is complex, and life and clean water there he deemed inseparable, and I think that's true for all of us globally. Yet he said that the water is becoming increasingly scarce, as we know, and even more people are becoming subject to water stress, and that the intervention of technology, very interestingly, does present a disruption to the established social, cultural, political, and legal relationships governing water. But of course, the effects of this disruption need not be negative. So yes, this chapter actually applied to the Serekunda urban area in Gambia, which is a small West African developing country bordered by Senegal. And his sentiments apply to me very specifically to the situation in South Africa. And we are increasingly required by water policies and strategies to investigate the potential of innovative technologies to improve, in particular, water services delivery and water resource management in the country. But the growing needs for these interventions necessitate that we take a closer look at what must be achieved before we can rely on these technological innovations, especially so that we prevent issues such as what happened in the Masubuko case. And this, of course, also includes the improvement and establishment of, for instance, internet infrastructure to facilitate vital aspects of modern technology, such as the Internet of Things, so we can actually proceed with these technological interventions without it just being absolutely unrealistic at this point. It's also very noteworthy that Prof. Cooper has done significant field work as it concerns the use of technologies to facilitate access to water. So two of his research articles come to mind, namely a co-authored article titled Using Smart Pumps to Help Deliver Universal Access to Safe and Affordable Drinking Water. This was from 2017, and he wrote a similar paper saying, titled Using Smart Pumps to Improve Access to Water in Rural Gambia, and it includes reflections on the importance of theory and field work in achieving SDG 6. So to me, the former article actually presents a technological innovation or intervention and holds that it's estimated that broken water pumps impacts 62 million people in sub-Saharan Africa, and that over the last 20 years, broken hand pumps only have represented $1.2 to $1.5 billion of lost investment in this region, with 30 to 40% of rural water systems failing prematurely. Now, he holds that while the contributory factors are complex and multifaceted, he considers that improved post-construction monitoring strategies for remote water projects, so he's alluding here to sustainable access to water, and which rely on smart pumps to monitor operational performance in places of instead of physical site visits, may address some of these problems and actually help reduce the heavy time and resource demands and stakeholders associated with the traditional monitoring strategies. So smart pumps, he postulates, could play a significant role in improving project monitoring, and might actually subsequently help deliver universal access and affordable drinking water by 2030, which constitutes one of the key targets of course, the United Nations' Sustainable Development Goal 6, and it's embedded in some national constitutions. To me, just as a final remark, this research is particularly interesting because it focused on the issue of broken infrastructure and how it ties in with the realization of SDG 6. And Professor Keat also spoke to this, and this continues to be a huge issue in the South African access to water landscape. And yeah, Professor Cooper and his co-authors also take a very sober approach to suggesting the technological intervention, so the hand pump, and they say that smart pumps, can only be effective if we identify the cost, reliability, functionality, security, and user acceptability of these technologies. These issues have previously been identified by some research to be important barriers to uptake. But nevertheless, the research concludes by also recognizing that the use of smart pumps or other forms of telemetry could potentially improve both monitoring and maintenance strategies and ultimately increase the longevity of water projects. So as such, these technologies could play a significant role in securing or in ensuring universal access to safe and affordable drinking water by 2030, which then obviously constitutes one of the key targets associated with SDG 6. And yeah, I think this provides also a necessary background for today's discussion, seeing as this research already identifies the potential of certain technologies and innovations towards realizing the right to water. So on this note, I revert back to you, Professor du Plessis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicoline. I'm sure that Nathan would have been very happy with the way in which you've presented his work. And thank you also for having drawn those links with the presentation by Prof. Michael Keat. So Michael and Nicoline, I'm going to invite you to be ready to answer some questions. But for that, we also need the participants' involvement. So I'm keeping an eye on raised hands, and I would like to ask that you do raise your hand if you would like to pose a question. You are also welcome to put it in the chat. And while you think, Michael, one of the questions that came to mind when you spoke about the standards ladder, I'm wondering whether or not we see in South Africa a moving up and down that ladder, especially considering what's been playing out in the Eastern Cape, some parts of Northwest, also in Gauteng, the Vaal specifically, and elsewhere, where people really have intermittent access to, increasingly so, to access to water, due mainly to maintenance failures and poor governance. So how does the law, in your view, respond to that, where we are still battling to get some people on the ladder, so to speak, but we see some of those at the higher end of the ladder moving down? So if you could perhaps respond to that, and then I will return to the chat. Thanks.
Thanks, Anel. I think definitely the ladder involves, let's call it ladder and snakes. So clearly from the stats, you can see that people were, if not at the top of the ladder, they were in the, in the status of people who had access to water, and those numbers have actually dropped off, as I mentioned in the statistics. And in the document that I'm going to prepare, I'm going to screenshot something out of the general household survey just to indicate those numbers. So you might think, well, it's not a huge number, 90.3% down to 88%. But when you're thinking about percent of 60 million people, that's a huge number of people who have had access to water previously and now who don't have it. Now, I think at one level, the answer to your question is the law addresses that, because the standards that are set out in the 2001 regulations, if I remember correctly, indicate that where there is a discontinuation or a limitation, as they refer to, of the water supply for whatever reason, that ought not to take longer than, I think it's 48 hours to be remediated or repaired. And that in a case where that doesn't happen, that alternative sources of water have to be provided. So under those circumstances, you'll have situations such as tankers being taken around to provide people with water. So on paper, the law addresses that, but the reality is that it's not, if we use an analogy, and I suppose it's an analogy that could be used in relation to any of the socio-economic rights. If we look at the rights of freedom of the person, if a person is detained without legal reason, all that the state needs to do to ensure that that person's right is fulfilled is release him or her. But in relation to the water situation, if there's a breakdown, and I think in many parts of the country, these breakdowns have turned out to be something far more than temporary. So the sorts of things that Nicoline were talking about, there's part of the infrastructure that doesn't work. And the water services provider then doesn't fix it. What you end up with there is a situation where people have a lack of access to water for extended periods of time. So the law technically is there for them to use, but I think, and it's the same in relation to the law that is being flouted every second of every day in relation to purification of sewage, where there's unpurified, in many cases, completely raw sewage going into our rivers and streams. The law is there that prevents that. But I think, if people are going to think of using that law in court applications, you have to look at what the outcome is going to be. What's the remedy? And if the remedy is to order municipality to do something where A, doesn't have any money, B, doesn't have any expertise, and C, in a situation where the National Department of Water feels that it may not interfere, incorrectly in my view, then you're essentially just wasting your time relying on the law. So I think it's always important to bear in mind that the law is only one of several pillars of governance, and those include things like finance, they include technology and innovation we're talking about here, and they would include things such as political will, and prioritizing what's important. So I think, where you've got an enormous governance breakdown as we have. So, in relation to access to water and purification of water, I think it's as interesting to look at articles on how to purify water and technology and innovation as it is to look at the Auditor General's reports of the functioning of municipalities. In fact, I would say that's more important. So the law is there, yes, but I think that in the context in which these things are happening, the law is potentially a bit of a blunt tool, I would say.
Thank you very much, Mike. And it's not the focus of today, but I think increasingly also we will have to start asking questions about corporate social responsibility and the private sector's co-responsibility in helping protecting the quality of water in the country, considering the mining sector's impact and that relation that I earlier referred to between energy generation and water. Water services provision and water quality management in the country. We've got a few more questions. I'm going to start with that of Melandri. Melandri is asking what your view is on the potential impact of consumer behavior concerning other issues related to access to water, such as water conservation management, and demand management. And let me link that with Germari's question, and then I will give you an opportunity to respond before getting to you, Andries and Karen's. Germari makes the statement, and she reminds us that the National Water Act also makes provision for the so-called reserve. Do you think that it's managed and conceptualized well for purposes of access to basic or sufficient water, our understanding of the reserve? So if you could respond to Melandri and Germari, and then we'll move on to the next. Thanks.
So the first question relating to consumer behavior, I think that's absolutely huge. So I think I neglected to mention the statistic in my address, but in that household survey, the Stats SA found that the percentage of households that are paying for water in the 2019 survey was 44.6%. So in other words, 55% of households are not paying for water. And either they've chosen not to pay for water and there aren't any consequences, or else they fall into that category that I was talking about earlier of people that have just never been billed. So consumer behavior is key because, I think in relation to payment for water, I find it difficult to think how some kind of situation where consumers are not having to pay for water will assist with conservation of water, in the sense that as soon as you put a value on something, then people use it properly. At least intuitively, that would be the situation. So I think, and this is something that appeared to be the case in the Masubuko case, where in that particular area, previously people had as much water as they wanted without having to pay for it. Then people don't worry about leaks, they don't worry about leaving taps on, they don't worry about, watering their gardens in the middle of the day and so on and so forth. I think there has to be some kind of value on water in order to lead to those issues of demand management, and really using the amount of water that is suitable in relation to the amount of water that is available. So consumer behavior is absolutely key. The extent to which the law can influence that, again, I don't know. So, currently in terms of municipal laws, people have to pay for water. But if 55% are not paying for water, well, what is the law doing about that at the moment? And I don't think it's a problem of the law per se, but the people who are actually using the law or ought to use the law in order to secure that. So to me, the main governance driver in relation to consumer behavior is politics, and I mean that with a small p. I'm not talking about party politics. I'm talking about political decisions. Clearly, a political decision not to ensure that people pay for water and cut them off if they don't pay. The second question was in relation to the reserve. I mean, my feeling is that the the reserve determinations, and I think that there are a number of those that are still preliminary reserve determinations, they're not the problem in relation to access to water. So where there are water availability issues, it would, and again, you know, I'd stand corrected by people who might know more about this than I do, but I think it would either be issues relating to the drought, where, you know, I think the reserve would apply more in relation to, let's call it, normal situations. But it's after that level of the sort of water supply process. It's not the determination of the reserve. My feeling is that there's enough water there, but when the water service provider has to use that water to distribute it, that's where it's breaking down.
It's an interesting view, Mike, to which Karen responded. She's not asking a question. She's also commenting on the reserve and making the point that it's key, and that there's this prioritization of the green issues over the brown, and that might be an issue to challenge legally, and we could engage with Karen on that after her presentation also. Then Johandri asked a tricky question, and you alluded to a response. She's asking, okay, so if the law is only half of the story and only serves to protect us that far in terms of having our access to water rights realized, what's the alternative? And she's not saying it, but I think it would be interesting also to hear your view about ratepayers associations taking over services in some municipalities, especially in our neck of the woods here in the Northwest. We've seen that and happening also legally. The courts have actually given their stamp of approval where that happened, and it was proven that the municipality simply could not deliver. Your view perhaps on that before I move to the next set of questions?
Yeah, I think you get to situations where citizens basically have to take matters into their own hands, and I think we saw this with the riots that were happening in KZN primarily a month ago, and clearly this is the thinking behind what happened with the Neoliberal case, what's happening in Harry Smith and various other places. I think it's very problematic, and the judgment that I have in Neoliberal, it just contains the order, so I don't know what the legal reasoning is. But I think it's dodgy from a legal point of view. I mean, ultimately, it's the state's responsibility. And when I read Yolandri's question earlier, it's now gone up my screen, and the scrolling's not working very nicely. But you know, ultimately, the answer lies, as I said earlier, in politics. It's not the law. You know, the law is there; it can be used, but either because one foresees that a successful judgment will lead to no change, because there aren't resources to address it, or whatever other reason. I think the law is a tool that would be used in appropriate context. So what's the solution? I mean, it might sound trite, but the solution is to replace the institutions that are not doing their jobs. Democracy. I mean, as I said, that sounds trite and glib, but you know, that really seems to be the answer.
Thanks, Mark. We are running out of time, but I do want you to briefly respond to two questions related to underground water, really. Altoon is asking your view on the bottled water industries, this privatization of water in the context of the large disparities and inequalities affecting access in South Africa. And then John Kanamaguri is asking, in order to increase the quantity of water available, is there anything being done to identify, use and manage the underground waters that are available? And I think we will conclude with your response to those two. There was a question also for Nicoline, which we will get back to when she's presented towards the end of today. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, I haven't looked in much detail at the bottled water industry, but I would assume in most cases that the amount of water that is being extracted in order to bottle would require water use license. So, you know, I assume that there's some kind of decision-making process that involves consideration of the amount of water that is available in that particular system before it's extracted for use in bottles. So I don't really have much more to say about it than that, and that doesn't mean that that's the end of the story. As I said, I haven't looked at it in too much detail, but you know, we need to bear in mind that maybe it's not an enormous issue in many parts of South Africa at the moment, but in many parts of the world, if there wasn't bottled water, people would have no clean water to drink. So bottled water in many parts of the world is essential. And in some cases, it's not even in bottles, it's in those sort of sachets. Where without those, people would have no clean water to drink. And in many parts of the world, even then, the cleanliness of that water is regarded as fairly suspect. As far as underground water is concerned, my understanding of the situation is that there are quite large underground reserves in many parts of the country that are not currently being utilized or fully utilized. So there's a fair amount of spare capacity in relation to underground water. But obviously, use of underground water needs to be very carefully managed in exactly the same way as surface water needs to be managed, because we don't want to deplete aquifers. It has to be done in a way that is sustainable. But one of the other factors that I've come across, and maybe some of the water scientists will be able to confirm this, is that underground water availability largely mirrors surface water availability. So there's more underground water in the wetter parts of the country than there is in the drier parts of the country, whereas in the drier parts of the country, those would be the parts where you would want to use underground water more because of the lack of surface water. So there is, you know, in relation to water availability, there's scope for using more underground water. But, you know, I think the projections in relation to water scarcity overall, and not only the projections, but the assessments of the current situation also take into account what is known about the availability of underground water at the moment. And I think also that there's still a fair amount of research that has to be done in relation to exactly how much and what sort of quality underground water there is. You know, I think that there's still a lot of gaps that have to be filled there in relation to our knowledge.
Sure, thanks, Mike. And also Nicoline for this session. I'm inviting participants, if they still want to engage with you further, to do so in the chat. Nicoline will have another chance to present a little bit later on the program. I invite you to rush for a coffee or a glass of water in the next 6 minutes. We will reconvene at past. And Dr. Khamari Viljoen will be the chair of that session. And thank you also for the participation so far. Yuri Moelman, your comment is also acknowledged. Thank you and see you in 5 minutes.
Welcome back, everyone. We are looking forward to session 2 of this colloquium, and it will be on water resource management, data, and its impact on the right of access to water. I hope you're looking forward to it as much as I am. But again, without further ado, I will hand over to our facilitator for this session, Dr. Hermarie Viljoen, Senior Lecturer from the Northwest University. Hermarie, over to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Nicoline. Yeah, for this great event, very topical initiative, we really enjoyed today, and I just want to quickly echo what Anel said earlier, that we really have the experts in the room today. So thank you very much for the initiative. But for this session, ladies and gentlemen, we've got 2 more extremely dynamic presenters lined up. These people are passionate, and they really, you'll see, they really create positive change. So the first speaker is Karen Bosman. So it's my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, to introduce you to the owner and the director of Karen Bosman Sustainable Solutions. Karen has almost 30 years of experience in environmental, water resource and waste management and governance in South Africa. And she is known for her exceptional knowledge in the technical interpretation of our environmental legislation. Karen, thank you so much. You are still muted.
There we go. Can you guys hear me and see me now?
Very well, thanks.
Excellent. Thank you for the opportunity, Hermarie and Anel and Nicoline. I really appreciate it. And you've given me quite a big bullet to bite this morning. Wide discussions on water resource management data and impacts on the rights of access to water. So I'll try my best to address most of the issues in as short a time as possible, but I can possibly talk about this for days. Starting off by saying, if we look at our planet from the moon, we see the thing should rather be called water instead of earth. Oh, there we go. But if one puts all the water together in a spherical ball, we actually only have 1.4 cubic kilometers of water in total. And while nearly 70% of the Earth's surface is covered in water, only 2.5% is drinkable without requiring expensive treatment. And of that, only 1% is easily accessible. One also have to consider things such as that, almost a quarter of all the protein consumed of people in Africa is derived from subsistence freshwater fishing or river-based fisheries. And that most of our food supply in Africa are from subsistence farming. And this brings into the discussion and into the debate the whole water, food, energy nexus and aspects relating to water security. Water is an essential resource that we need for all anthropogenic activities, and all anthropogenic activities has the possibility to detrimentally impact on water resources. So while we were taught in grade 2 of a water cycle, hydrological cycle of evaporation, condensation and precipitation, and then maybe you were lucky and you were taught about infiltration into the groundwater, the reality of the 21st century is that we have a modified anthropogenic hydrological cycle in which we intervene and interact with water at every step of the way, abstracting water from rivers or from groundwater for municipal use, purifying that water, discharging it, in releasing it in various ways and means, so that every step of the way, it is not a system that is as simple or as straightforward as it would appear to be. And water is quite complex when you start to want to manage it. Currently, as it stands, more than 1 billion of the almost 8 billion people on Earth does not have access to safe drinking water, and 3 billion, that's almost half the world's population, does not have access to basic sanitation. This lack of safe drinking water and poor sanitation takes a greater toll on humans than all war and terrorism combined. the high risk we have of exposure of waterborne diseases, which includes diarrhea, cholera, typhoid, dysentery, malaria, polio, even in the developed world, is a pressing issue. And if we look at South Africa, we measure our success or failure in water quality management, for example, in the amount of babies dying before they are 1 year old. And it is exceptionally high, especially in provinces such as the Eastern Cape, which does not have adequate water services. So when we talk about water management, we are talking about literally people dying. In Flint, Michigan, in America, a problem with old infrastructure has also caused severe human health concerns and impact. And because water resources and activities that might potentially affect water resources are essential to everything we do, we therefore need to protect and properly manage and govern this. And for this reason, the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations lists the right of access to clean water as their goal number 6, which sets very ambitious targets. For example, we should by 2020, which is last year, protect and restore water-based ecosystems. We should by 2030 implement integrated water resources management at all levels. And also by 2030 improve water quality by reducing pollution and eliminating dumping, and ensure that we cut untreated wastewater in half and so on. Now, a goal is something you would like to achieve, and it's not necessary to say that you will achieve it, as we've seen with the Kyoto protocols and our air quality and climate change initiatives. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't at least start and begin to address these things. What we want is everybody needs to get proper access to clean water, but we're sitting in a situation where we have sewage in our streets, children growing up on uranium-containing mine dumps in approved housing developments by the city of Joburg, for example. And so a strategic measure or means to implement better water management was devised over the last 20 odd years or so, where water management or integrated water resource management has been defined as a strategic means to balance water use and protection across catchments or basins in order to achieve economic, social, and environmental goals. This implies that water is not just a technological issue that needs to be resolved, but that it's a socio-economic good, and that we must resolve conflicting needs and expectations of users through institutions at catchment levels that crosses political boundaries in order to prevent global water crises. In order to properly manage, we need to properly measure and assess and monitor and collect information about consequences, risks, and liabilities. In 2003, the Third World Water Forum in Kyoto established an agenda for action towards sustainable global management, water management. And I'm not going to stand still at all the guiding principles. For me, the key guiding principle here, which brings me to my tie-in from resource management to data, is that knowledge is critical for good water management. Good scientific information is the basis for effective management. And we need scientific information about ecosystems, hydrological processes, ecological processes, socioeconomics, and the way human activities are influencing this hydrological cycle. And we must regularly update our management plans with effectively structured and coordinated monitoring. The Global Water Security Report has also made a finding that says one of the biggest challenges regarding water security is our lack of knowledge regarding the social, political, economic, and environmental components, but most importantly, regarding the basic sciences determining the availability and quality of water. The ignorance of basic sciences results in incorrect identification of root causes of problems or failures. An example in the Ganges Basin is that due to the lack of understanding of the hydrological function of the system, decision makers believed the solution was to dam water in Nepal, where in fact the solution revolved around managing groundwater abstraction and recharging the Ganges floodplain. In South Africa, monitoring now data has shown that the Vaal River system, that by simply fixing leaks and improving plumbing of all the areas serviced by water covered used from the Vaal River system, we can increase the capacity of the Vaal River system by almost 50%, because almost 50% of the water we pay quite a lot of money for to purify through Rand water gets lost because of leaks in plumbing and leaks in pipelines. The water governance therefore has a bigger context than just what we see as the Department of Water Affairs or municipalities. We have to understand the ecological system of the global water cycle, catchments, subbasins, and dams or smaller systems in order to understand the global, international, state, provincial, local, and district municipality roles and the rules that govern these different things. From informal rules, things like water turns, like is especially established in many areas in the Karoo, to our constitutional overarching legislation, how those legislations are interpreted and implemented, and then making sure we can measure this. Internationally, our approach has evolved over the last 100 years from minimum control, agricultural irrigation-based legislative system, to rule-based approaches where we have thumb sucks, 500 meters from this, 100 meters from that, to more recently risk-based approaches, which makes more sense legally and scientifically and is more just, but requires better information and requires more accurate information, which then places bigger emphasis on the accuracy of our monitoring. So what I want to chat about is what is monitoring, just briefly, and the purposes of monitoring, and then how can we make monitoring data more accessible, especially for these role players on institutional, state, and local and district municipal level, who maybe not necessarily have the scientific understanding or background that is needed to interpret the results properly. The Afrikaans expression is om te meet is om te weet. To measure is to know, or what it gets measured gets done. If you can't measure it, you can't improve upon it. And you cannot measure, you cannot manage. What you cannot manage, you cannot change. Like the old saying of any guy who's ever tried to build a house, measure twice, cut once, because it's expensive if you don't measure properly. And it's impossible to take good water governance decisions without good water monitoring programs. To improve the water quality, for example, in our water resources, and to improve our potable water supply systems, we need to know what we are monitoring and why we are doing it. A simple example is, my one friend is a civil engineer, and she's sitting right here with me, and mentioned to me last night that a sewage system requires a certain percentage of stormwater ingress in order to keep the sewage running in the reticulation network. And if we can't measure how much water we need to keep the system running, how would we know, can we increase the capacity of the network, or maybe we should just create capacity by reducing stormwater ingress? Without monitoring that, we won't know it. It is also important to realize that the collection of data is not monitoring and will never lead to management. Data is simply collecting values. Somebody needs to go and interpret that to grasp the relationships between the data and turn that into information. But information is also not sufficient to manage. You need to grasp the patterns between the information you collected in order to turn this into knowledge. And that then gives you the comprehension to understand the reason why these patterns are there and understand the principles behind it, which leads you to the wisdom to make good management and governance decisions. So there's an entire process between collecting, monitoring data and actually reaching management decisions. The problem is that managers don't understand what it is that they want to measure because they don't have the scientific background. And if they do measure, they have no idea how to interpret the measurements or what to do with it. And important in this regard is that technological solutions developed by the North does not necessarily cater for the problems or the management questions of the South. And often once you get a tool, the tool does something, you bought it from some company in Germany or Denmark, you now just use it because it's a tool used by Europe and you think, oh, it must be good because we bought it from them, but it does not necessarily address our local problems. Managers who don't know how to measure or what they are measuring for rather settle for wanting what they can measure. And this is typically the kind of representation of results you will see at a catchment forum meeting. Pages and pages full of Excel data, volumes and concentrations that makes no sense to anybody. This is not data. It is also not even information, and it most certainly is not management, something that you can make managed decisions on. Management decisions must be based on information, not on just data. Data are values collected by measurement. And once we've collected the data and evaluated and interpreted in the context of the state that we collected in our management questions, then only then can we make decisions. Your computer can say Intel Insight all at once. If there's an idiot on the outside who don't know what to do with the technology on the inside, you will still get bad decisions. So monitoring is a systematic collection of data for a specific purpose on specific aspects of the water resource or the water supply system, which is measured for the correct variables and interpreted in the correct context. One example I always use is where people make incorrect use of the South African National Drinking Water Standard. And they use that to measure environmental impact or compliance of groundwater, which is totally wrong because our groundwater systems are, some of them have been deposited under marine conditions and will have sodium chloride concentrations of more than 1,000 milligrams per liter. Some other areas in our geology has arsenic in high concentrations that will kill people. So we can't just assume that that quality of water coming out of the groundwater will be the same quality as what has been purified at the municipal sewage works or water purification works. You cannot make that assumption. And if you compare monitoring data against the wrong standards, you will get the wrong management questions. The process of water monitoring is that water samples should be collected somewhere and then analyzed at a laboratory. Then the analytical results be submitted. Water quality data verification and validation should happen because errors can creep in along the way. Then it should be interpreted and visualized by specialists and then reported and communicated. Because unless you communicate the data in a way that decision makers can understand, they cannot make informed decisions. Unfortunately, in reality, we take samples, but then send it to the lab and take the lab reports, and the managers are trying to make decisions based on lab reports. There is zero quality control. There is no proper limit values for comparison. There is no visualized interpretation, and that's why we get poor qualities of decision making. People
Karen,
take water samples.
Sorry, Karen, I just want to give a heads up. 5 minutes to go. Thank you.
Okay, I'll be done in 5. People take water samples because they're forced to do so by law, but currently there is seriously lack of interpretation of that data. And because there's no proper interpretation of the data, it is seen in a negative light, and it's not used to inform decisions for better water management and governance, which means it's not used to improve the right of access to water. My things seem to be frozen now. So I will just quickly run through a couple of slides. The most important aspect when you design a monitoring program is to understand what the management question is that you need to have answered and how the monitoring of water can answer this management question. If you don't formulate monitoring programs in relation to management questions, you won't get the right management answers. For example, this tower, you can ask a question, how big is the tower? And you'll get an answer, but that's not your question. If you say, we want to measure this, then you'll get a completely different answer. So we need monitoring to do things like early warning systems, and you need to formulate your questions in terms of the role you are playing so that you can formulate it in terms of the objective, the management question that you want to have answered. I'm not going to talk to you about all these different standards and so on, but you must understand that water is not only a socio-economic good, but it's also very technical and scientific, and therefore you must have science-based monitoring programs and make sure people who are taking samples know what they are sampling, and that you can interpret your results in the context of the field conditions when you took the samples. And that is nobody uses even the field conditions when they take samples. And it plays a critical role in the interpretation. Laboratories and SANA's accreditation of laboratories is another important consideration. And then the last consideration, the interpretation, reporting, and communication. I've seen so many bad interpretations of monitoring data. I can keep you busy for hours. But there are a number of good interpretations that actually tell a story. Now, if you think of that Excel spreadsheet I showed you earlier versus this graph, this tells me something that I can work with and that I can make management decisions on. The same with this type of graph, the same with this type of graph, and in same with this type of graph. This can give me a graph that will tell me a whole story about a specific area and the characteristics of water in that area. And we must make sure we understand what we are looking at when we communicate our results. Now, this is where we get the opportunity to use technology, to make sure we communicate our results to managers. And this is where we take technology into the future. We were fortunate to be funded by the Water Research Commission, and I'm so glad Jay is here, because they are really taking the lead in ensuring the digitization of water monitoring and the technological advances to make water monitoring data more accessible. Go and have a look at internetofwater.org, and these are their funders. And this is where they have all kinds of programs. Our program that we've developed, the Water Monster app, basically digitizes the capturing of field data to improve the interpretation of water monitoring results, and then have immediate availability, as well as the visualization of data from, instead of spreadsheets, on proper graphs. And this is how you bring technology and make decisions better. In summary, monitoring is not a mitigation measure. It must be effective and cost effective, and it must always be aimed at addressing a management question, because that's how we can use technology to advance the right of water. And then we move from simple data collection to proper water management and governance. Any questions?
Thank you, Karen, so much. I will definitely invite questions, but I think we should first give Jacques de Vos an opportunity. So please, guys, hold your questions, or you can also, of course, type it in the chat box so long. So let me continue straight up with Jacques, introduce him. He's the CEO and the founder of Metsanin. It's now a subsidiary of the Vodacom Group. He is leading this organization in delivering digital transformation across the African continent. And his skill in driving innovation in Africa have not only helped countries like Kenya and Tanzania transition into the fourth industrial revolution, but have actually safeguarded and benefited the lives of many people without access to technology. So, Jacques, we are really looking forward to your views on water technologies. Thank you.
Thank you, Germarie. And thank you for the opportunity to share some of our, I would like to refer to it as lessons learned, not from academic point of view, but really experience and insights gathered by supporting a number of customers and countries in delivering services to their citizens. Before I start, my background is technical, and I'm starting in the healthcare industry. So I would like to acknowledge a number of third-party stakeholders that supported me in providing real-life use cases and examples. So EMS, GLS, and then CleanStream, Fritz Becker, that provided some very, very interesting material that I'll share today. Karen, I think maybe just for some context, I'll just focus, and without repeating anything that was shared by Karen, and we didn't compare notes beforehand, so there's no collusion. Just focusing on if you look at the purpose of a water authority, specifically focusing on the availability and quality aspect. And Karen shared this graph, which is really the foundation on which we built all our systems and solutions that we provide to customers. And we just refer to customers. These are both public and private sector stakeholders. So that the data insight continuum, as we referred to it, as a starting point. I think there was several references made in the earlier presentations to technology and the role of technology. I think our focus as Mezzanine is really to take technology out of the equation and focus really on the data component. To say, let's hide the complexity of what we refer to democratizing the means to capture data and record data, and rather focus on making these data and information sets available to the stakeholders that's got the necessary knowledge and insight in interpreting the data. So the contribution really is to, as I've said, to democratize data, and of course within the framework of ensuring that only authorized stakeholders do have access to data. But we often see in working with governments that we have all these different stakeholder groups, each operating in their respective silos. So if you look at our healthcare stakeholders, the environmental health stakeholders, they spend a lot of in recording and gathering data, and that same data points can be used by agriculture stakeholders, but we live in our respective silos. So a lot of what we're focusing on is to say we need to be able to service an agnostic set of connected resources. So whether it's your river systems or your water treatment or wastewater treatment, or a lot of communities rely on groundwaters, boreholes. So how do we allow all of these resources and the data that we record from these resources, aggregate them in a secure and quality ensured way, and then make them available to the set of stakeholders within that specific country or region or function of government. So that just a couple of examples of how we translate and almost take the vital signs of these resources. So there's a number of tools. Karin, you referred to the work you're doing with your application. So these are human-driven or data captured by field workers or scientists or government employees using a handheld device, which entail taking photographs, recording GPS locations, and then recording relevant information. The biggest, if you look at the data pool or the data lake, the biggest contributor ever is now moving from human-driven data recording to machine-generated data. References was made to smart metering, and Prof. Keat, you've mentioned the importance of, from an equity point of view, in making sure that if we introduce technology as an enabler in delivering better quality, more accessible services to our citizens, that these means are accessible on an equity basis across our different geographic areas in the countries. So I think I won't elaborate on the residential smart metering. I think there's a lot of examples of that. What I would like to focus on is more of what we refer to as the upstream interventions that can reduce the compounded effect of a downstream stakeholder if you look at a river system. So wastewater treatment inflow, I think these are screenshots from either Motlasana or JB Marks, Potchefstroom. So different sensors, different providers, some of them multinational companies, some of them local bespoke solutions that's been developed by local entrepreneurs or tech companies. All of these sensors recording some specific indicator that is of relevance to a specific stakeholder. So in this case, we look at water quality, so pH, monitoring dissolved oxygen, for example, or EC levels. Now, if we have these different data sets, and as Karin asked the question, how do we make this data available to a stakeholder that's got the necessary knowledge and skill to extract insight out of the data and then use that to inform better decision making. So ultimately, how do we make data available to our respective functions of government and then private sector stakeholders contracted by government to fulfill their function, and then very important to hold these stakeholders accountable. So what I would like to share to make it very tangible is just one use case. And I think if you look at the Orange River water management area, there's quite a large percentage of our South African population, also Namibia, that rely on the Orange water management area for their day-to-day needs, both citizens for consumption, but also agriculture for irrigation of food crops. Now, if you look at the Fall River confluence flowing into the Orange River close to Priska, your upstream stakeholders, let's say, for example, the Gauteng catchment area, if you have a polluter or a surplus in local government not being able to meet the sanitary or sanitization demand of a specific community, the delta between the demand and supply end up in the river system. And that effect is then compounded all along from the origination of a river typically down to where it runs into the Atlantic Ocean on the left-hand side. So the question we've asked is, can technology, and this use case specifically look at how can we use technology to enable better decision making, including enabling from a timing point of view, decision making downstream if we know that there's a specific event upstream. Whether it's a weather-related event like rain, or whether it's a malfunction or non-performance of a wastewater treatment plant, or a mining activity or industrial activity like we now saw in Durban with the spillage there. Can we use this information to inform the downstream stakeholders to change their corrective action or to introduce a corrective action across the different stakeholder groups? So just to one example, and this is...
I want to remind you, you've got 4 minutes to go. Thank you, Job.
Just to go back to the pyramid, so just one example, one data point, E. coli as the bacteria linked to non-functioning sanitation system. So this is the data point along the Orange River, starting from the Van der Kloof Dam on the left-hand side to Onseepkans, which is close to the coast. And these are just data points collected. Now, if we give these data points context and meaning, so we overlay them with the rainfall data and the associated flow within the river system, we note here that the first 10 millimeters of rain that fall in a specific catchment area is having a 2-3 day delay on an increase in E. coli count within this river, above the average count typically monitored at a specific location, in this case Uppington. So we can now say the event upstream was 10 millimeters of rain, so the first flush, as the experts refer to it, and all the delta sanitation surplus that's washed into the river system has a 2-3 day delay for residents in Uppington, which for the agriculture stakeholders translate into, can I use the water at a specific point in time to irrigate my crops? So this is titled dissolved solids. It's a measure for salt content in water. There are certain acceptable levels, which is indicated here in black for irrigation use, agriculture, food crop irrigation use, and then for domestic use. And what we note here from left to right is that, and this is the compounded effect I referred to earlier, is as we move towards the coast, we see the TDS count increasing above acceptable irrigation levels. So if we have an early warning system in place that triggers the 10 millimeters of rain event, it can inform farmers downstream to not irrigate for a specific period of time because they can expect a above acceptable threshold in TDS levels. The same event, the same technology, the same data points for the healthcare stakeholders paint a very different picture. This is hospitalization numbers in Uppington for a period of time in 2019. You can note here the river flow spike, and then 2 days after that, a spike in diarrhea cases in Uppington. The second spike, 2-3 days later, a spike in hospitalization cases in Uppington. So from an environmental point of view and from a community-oriented primary healthcare point of view, we can inform our communities that rely on day-to-day use of the Orange River in this case for drinking or for washing or for cleaning purposes, not to use water from the system. So the key takeouts to close is that if we, and this is our focus, is how do we make these enablers, technology being referred to as enabler, available to enable us as a collective to democratize our respective data sets, again in a responsible way, and allow the relevant stakeholders to make data-driven decisions on a day-to-day basis. And then as a secondary benefit, and I think this is where, from a legislation point of view, we do have good legislation in place on a local government level to use the data to hold the respective stakeholders accountable for the function that they're responsible for, both public and private sector stakeholders. So we believe by providing what we call last mile visibility, we can enforce and improve accountability across all of our different stakeholder types. And then I think time doesn't allow, but I think one of the key focus areas which Professor Keat also referred to is how do, from a sustainability point of view, how do we make these enablers available to our local government stakeholders, to our private sector, the industries, and get all of the contributors and the stakeholders reliant on these water catchment areas to collect data and make data available to improve quality of life for our citizens. So for us, it's about connecting the dots. The enablers are there. It's not futuristic. There's hundreds and thousands of these sensors already deployed in our country and on our continent. It's about, in a reliable, in a responsible way, to connect the dots and make the data information available to our decision makers. Thank you very much.
We thank you, Jacques, so much for your presentation. There are a lot of questions in the chat box, and I'm going to start at the very beginning. Karen, if you can sit straight up, please, because I think the first ones are for you. Steve observed or shared his observation with regard to the role of data and decision-making processes. If you can perhaps just tell us your view on this, especially when it's, with regard to permits and so forth, whether data is indeed presented in the permitting phase. And then also Karabile asked a question about spatial planning and water management, whether there's a link and whether it can be used to manage water. Perhaps you can share your views on those two questions, please, Karen.
Excellent. Well, firstly, I agree 100% with Steve. In the processing of applications for water use licenses, or even for waste disposal site licenses or permits, the word used, authorizations, the lack of skill and knowledge of the government officials means that they do not know what is presented to them, and they follow kind of a standard cut and paste, copy and paste approach. And this is why we get such poor quality water use authorizations. I often audit, before I audit somebody's compliance with a license, I cannot order compliance if the condition says jump over the moon. I first audit the license itself, and I audit against the provisions of PAJA. Is it site specific? Is it related to the reasonable things that's at hand at site? And 9 out of 10 times you will find that the regulator did not even consider the site-specific data presented to them and severely lack a knowledge of basic water chemistry. They will put ridiculous conditions in licenses such as 10 million rand pollution control dam that's constructed to control polluted water should have a sulfate concentration of 0 milligrams per liter, which makes no sense from any perspective. And so this is now because the applicants know, and the consultants of the applicants know, that the officials don't even look at the reports. They put nonsense in. They would put 20-year-old climate data in their reports because, and in global climate change, you simply cannot use 20-year-old climate data, but that's what we see when we do peer reviews for people like the Lawyers for Human Rights, for example, is that the standard of the report submitted in support of the application is extremely poor, and it is a total lack of understanding of basic water chemistry in those who both compiled the report to apply for authorization and the regulators who issued the authorization. And this is why I think Tefu later on made a comment about should there be a review. Absolutely. I think there should be peer review of all applications as well as peer review of the authorization instruments, especially when it comes to the use of data and whether relevant and recent data was used in the compilation of the application, and whether the drafter of the permit or the authorization instrument actually considered that data. And then with regard to the question if there's a link between spatial planning and water management, there absolutely should be one, but it is not made explicit. The water license regulations says, for example, you must consider socio-economic conditions, but it's not made explicit that socio-economic conditions should be informed by things such as spatial development framework plans, integrated development plans of the municipality, local municipality or district municipality, and that the data used to compile even things like spatial development frameworks and IDPs are very, very poor. It's lacking, and it's old data. And so now how are you supposed to plan for the supply of reticulation services to your municipality if you don't even use the most recent census data, and if you didn't use the most recent climatic data? How can you design a stormwater management plan if you don't even know how much stormwater to expect to be running off from a premises? So this should be made much more explicit in the processes. And I think it ties up to the comment later on, I think from Nicolene, that there's no proper guidelines on the actual collection data or on the actual interpretation of data. People say use accredited laboratories, But what they don't understand is not all laboratories are accredited for everything. Some laboratories are accredited for measuring salts. Some laboratories are accredited for measuring microbiological components. So to say, but I use accredited laboratory doesn't necessarily mean that laboratory was accredited for what you wanted it to measure. And then the whole process of validation and verification of the data. Laboratories do this awful thing of where they report all results in comparison with a drinking water standard, which is completely scientifically wrong. And yes, therefore we get garbage in and garbage out. And there are monitoring guidelines written by the Department of Water Affairs, but the competency severely lack in properly being able to interpret the data. They're happy when they get the lab report and then they present the Excel spreadsheet. And the conditions in the licenses are also not requiring the submission of interpreted data. It simply requires the submission of results. And I've literally seen a water affairs official take a lab report with 25 different variables, add them all up and write a big old number at the bottom. And people, even consultants, refer to water quality as good or bad. And you can never do that. How can water quality be bad? Bad for what? From whose perspective? So when people start using unscientific language like that, I immediately dismiss that person as a scientist, and I have no confidence in their results or in their reports. I don't know, I think I've covered most of my questions, if I'm not mistaken.
You did. So thank you, Karen. Jacques, let's move over to you. There are two questions posed to you from Anel du Plessis and from Nicoline Stein. Anel is curious to what you deem to understand what the government or public stakeholders entail. Perhaps you can share your views there. And then Nicoline wanted to know more about what your experience as a private company or stakeholder has been with cities and perhaps government. Thank you, Jacques.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. I'll answer it in a South African context. So I think that, and this is where we need to connect the dots with the different disciplines within government. But if we just distinguish between local, provincial, national, and then on a national level, you look at Department of Water Affairs, Treasury, which has a fund that is important stakeholder in funding the infrastructure investment required in order to fix a lot of these challenges. I refer to the imbalance between demand and supply on a macroeconomic level within a specific municipality with respect to sanitation requirements for the capita within that specific local government. And then COTA, the Auditor General's Office, and then the departments, health, agriculture, rural development. And then I think if you go down to local government level, and this is also, Nicoline, hopefully answering your question, within a municipality, if you look at a municipality as our customer, we have silos within municipalities. So we service the finance department with a annual asset audit. The engineering department we support by providing sensors and the means to monitor the performance of, let's say, a water treatment plant. But these two departments doesn't communicate with one another or share their data with one another. So I think breaking down silos between stakeholders can be on a microeconomic level within a municipality between different departments, and then you can go to a district level, a provincial level, and a national level. But I think that the underlying principle, whether it's in Nigeria or Kenya or Mozambique or South Africa or even in Europe, where we do some work, remains the same. The investment we make in collecting a data point, the return on investment can be improved by making that data point available to all the relevant stakeholders. And then, Nicoline, to be more specific on your question, I think, and this is where legislation, in my very limited understanding as an engineer in South Africa, is very good, is there's the carrot approach, and to say, yes, there's improvement in efficiency and effectiveness and the cost of running your, let's say, water treatment plant, but then there's also the stick. And I think and this is in response to your question, from a private sector's point of view, we often see a treasury, whether it's a national or provincial treasury, investing in the means to use a stick and not the carrot. Whereas if we go 10, 15 years ago, it was very much a carrot approach. So I think we are moving towards a corrective action. What interventions need to be introduced in order to ensure that our citizens have access to clean water. And maybe just our experience, I've mentioned in the beginning that we do a lot of work on the healthcare and on the agriculture side. So where farmers are our customers and hospitals and clinics. And if you look at the environmental health component, these are all good money thrown after bad. We are treating the symptoms. And why we've been starting to work on water specifically is if you start to look at the diagnosis and the underlying problem, water is what I call compounding the downstream cost across all of these different functions within government. Farmers' inability to export their fruit because of the TDS levels that they've used in the irrigation water. Hospital admissions going through the roof because of diarrhea, which is something that's treatable but completely unnecessary if we have a good means of monitoring quality and activity upstream. So I think that there's the carrot and the stick, and I think legislation on a local government level as a starting point is an area that we look at of technology enabling the implementers of the legislation and the governance component to hold those parties accountable that need to perform these functions within municipalities. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. Colleagues, you'll remember at the beginning I promised that these will be two dynamic and passionate presenters, and I think they really did not fail us. Thank you so much, Karen and Jacques. You'll see in the chat, everybody that commented showed their appreciation for your presentations. Thank you so much. From all of us, Nicoline, over to you.
Thank you so much, Harmony, Karen, and Jacques. Wow, what an interesting session. I think we have all learned a lot, and from a lot of different perspectives, especially the lawyers among the crowd here. This has been very interesting, and I think we can approach our research now with new insights. But we will now have a 10-minute comfort break, so we will reconvene at 22 minutes past 12. And yes, enjoy a nice cup of coffee, and we'll see you again in 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Colleagues, welcome back. We are heading straight into our third and last session of today's colloquium. We've got our two final speakers, experts, lined up. I'm not the chair though. I'm going to hand over to Ms. Melandri Steenkamp. Melandri is a PhD candidate and her own doctoral thesis also looks at water security and water insecurity in an urban context with relation to South Africa. Melandri, over to you, and thank you for taking charge of the chairing.
I apologize, I just had to quickly close the door. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, Prof. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome the final speakers of the day and in what it will be our final session. So the final session of the day looks at water services delivery, intelligent water management technologies, and the right of access to water. We have Dr. Nicoline Steyn and Mr. Jay Bhagwan today. First up is Dr. Nicoline Steyn. Nicoline Steyn is currently a postdoctoral fellow at the NRF South African Research Chair in Cities, Law and Environmental Sustainability, also known as CLES. She obtained her LLB and her LLM at the Northwest University, both cum laude, and her scholarship is devoted to novel and unconventional research topics, and she remains dedicated and passionate about examining the sometimes unfamiliar nexus between law and technology. Nicoline recently completed her PhD in law and development at the age of 25 and within 2 years of registration on the topic of the realization of the constitutional water right in South African cities through intelligent water management technologies. Welcome, Nicoline. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much, Melandri. I'm just waiting for my PowerPoint to load. There we go. So yeah, thank you very much. I am looking forward to this presentation. I hope you are too. So today, under the theme of the session, I will be speaking about actually the South African law and policy vision for innovative approaches towards the service delivery challenges in cities. And then I will be specifically looking at intelligent water management technologies. So my presentation will follow the outline presented here on the screen, and I would like to mention that my presentation is quite on the theoretical side, and I really appreciate some of the practical examples from our previous speakers, and I'm also sure that Mr. Jay Bhagwan from the Water Research Commission will venture into the practical side. So without further ado, I would like to commence by saying that cities are, and also understood within my presentation as local governments, urban areas or municipalities are responsible for providing water services to their communities, as we all know. But this responsibility, or rather the function, is vested in the Constitution, and we know that Section 27(1)(b) of the Constitution guarantees everyone the right to have access to sufficient water, and that the state is expected to take reasonable legislative and other measures within its available resources to attain this progressive realization, as Professor Keat was speaking to earlier. Now, Section 152(1)(b) of the Constitution actually provides that it is an object of local government to ensure the provision of services to communities in a sustainable manner. And additionally, Schedule 4 Part B of the Constitution explicitly provides that local government is required to provide water and sanitation services to its communities. Now, as such, we can conclude that local governments or cities may be seen as playing a vital role in achieving the realization of the constitutional water right, of course, especially in terms of the standard of water services they provide. Now, as you can see on this slide, however, cities face many challenges related to the provision of water services. In fact, water provision and management is actually one of South Africa's most complex problems for municipalities in particular. And this is especially so since there are trends that go toward more significant densification and urbanization, along with environmental changes such as climate change and variability. And all of these are expected to exert excessive pressure on water resources also at a local level. Now, the statistics South Africa's 2019 General Household Survey is mentioned a few times today, but it says that the approximate total of 97.3% of households in metros had access to tap water. So that's in metropolitan areas in South Africa. But South Africa remains a water scarce and water stressed country, and the water resources available to the country's inhabitants are therefore very limited in extent. And the demand for water in cities is significantly affected by this, since the greater part of South Africa's population resides in urban areas. So this is exacerbated by issues such as stolen water and the fact that approximately 1.5 billion cubic meters of water is lost per year. And this now refers to the non-revenue water issue that has come up several times today. Now, water loss of this magnitude is mainly due to faulty piping infrastructure that has surpassed its lifespan and suffers under the pressure of the growing water demand in highly populated areas, among other issues, of course. But deteriorating infrastructure resulting from aging and poor maintenance is one of the country's biggest challenges. Now, what do we do about these challenges? Well, according to the Water Research Commission, innovation is regarded as one of the critical success factors essential to address the systemic water challenges and enable socioeconomic transformation. Now, innovation necessitates a concerted effort from all spheres of government, the private sector, as we have seen from Jacques and Karen, and civil society at large. Now, despite the fact that South Africa has been a central developer of innovative water-related technological solutions for several decades, and with many of these technologies being adopted worldwide, it actually continues to face complex water provision challenges, as I've mentioned. Now, this reality in the water services provision sector emphasizes the need to explore innovative solutions, which is a main theme of today's Colloquium. And we also need to explore technologies and processes in this regard. And this is necessary for cities to rise to the challenge of navigating water provision complexities moving into the future. And in my view, a failure to do so may compromise the constitutional water right. This is because the mentioned challenges negatively affect cities' ability to provide communities with access to sufficient water. And at the end of this presentation, I will speak to so-called intelligent water management technologies as a potential innovative solution within this context. So it's part of the solution, not the entire solution. Now, first, I'm exploring the national law and policy vision, of course, for innovative approaches to water service delivery challenge in this presentation. But I wanted to start with the national legal vision, and by this I also mean the primary laws, water laws in our country. It's necessary to mention that our national water law actually reflects what has been described as a radical approach towards the management and distribution of water. And the National Water Act, or the NWA, actually aims to provide for the fundamental reform of the law relating to water resources and provides for the effective and sustainable management of the country's water resources. The Water Services Act, on the other hand, also known as the WSA, deals specifically with aspects of water service provision, promoting the constitutional water right, and thereby contributes to the national water legislation's transformative purpose. So therefore, the constitutional water right is given legislative effect by the WSA, which provides for the rights of access to basic water supply and services and sanitation in South Africa. Now, it's quite interesting to note, well, from my perspective, that as early as 1996, the White Paper on Science and Technology back then held that innovation has become a crucial survival issue. And it says that a society that pursues well-being and prosperity for its members can no longer treat it as an option. And this was already 2 decades ago. Now, the new white paper on science, technology, and innovation of 2019 actually determines the government's long-term policy now, well, its policy direction to ensure a growing role for science, technology, and innovation, also known as STI, and how it may aid in improving the quality of life of South Africans, particularly in poor communities, which is, of course, very important. Now, this white paper also states that innovation is required to address the environment's protection and improve service delivery. Now, to my mind, considering all of this, technology and innovation must then feature as a central concern for especially cities in this day and age, given the unique challenges they face, such as the rapid urbanization and unbridled population growths, and their constitutionally entrenched object to provide services to the community in a sustainable manner. So arguably, to promote the role of technology and innovation in cities is pursuit to provide water services to communities, we need a strong legal framework and a policy vision. Now, in my research for this presentation and following a really thorough analysis, I was able to conclude that the primary laws, so the Water Services Act and the National Water Act, do not mention technology or innovation explicitly. And this comes as a surprise, given the white paper of 1996 already mentioned the necessity of innovation. Well, I guess debatably, the absence of legislative provisions aimed at promoting the use of technology and innovation in the water services provision sector can be construed as an obstacle that may be prohibitive or even limiting to the exploitation of technology and innovation in this regard. To me, this absence is even more concerning given disruptive technologies and innovation that may be viable solutions to pressing water service delivery challenges as those mentioned earlier. And the absence of relevant legislative provisions brings into question the current regulatory design of the country's water laws. Specifically, it begs the question whether these laws should become more proactive, responsive, and dynamic. Now, what I found very interesting is that, on the other hand, the need for cities to utilize technology and innovation in pursuit of their water service delivery objective is expressed very clearly in the country's policies, plans, and strategies. So, for instance, the National Development Plan of 2015, or the NDP, states that finding innovative approaches to address the country's biggest problems is necessary for a middle-income country to develop. And this includes focusing on scientific and technological advances. And it echoes suggestions in the white paper of more than 2 decades ago regarding science and technology. And yes, it says that both research and technology are important ingredients for innovation in an ever more competitive international economy. It also suggests that intermunicipal cooperation should form a part of this, and it should include, for instance, the exchange of learning experiences and technology. So it already emphasizes that knowledge sharing of this kind may be regarded as integral for cities to successfully harness innovative technologies and ultimately reach their service delivery mandates. Now, years after the adoption of the white paper, an even greater emphasis on innovation, amongst other things, culminated in the adoption of the white paper on science, technology, and innovation of 2019. And this brought about certain paradigm shifts that, it is considered vital towards the research, development, testing, and implementation of especially technological innovations that could address the country's socioeconomic problems, such as issues to access to water. In particular, this new white paper makes the argument that planning between different spheres of government and the private sector is vital to ensure that the country partakes in the broad development of the world-leading technologies, systems, and capabilities that are also that are tailored for South Africa, instead of merely adopting such solutions or technologies. So it's obviously against the one-size-fits-all approach. It also advocates for collaborative planning and coordination, and says that it may require developing a policy nexus that includes stakeholders such as the Department of Science and Technology, as well as the Department of Telecommunications and Postal Services. And it says that this may, for instance, assist in modernizing government services. This is also emphasized in the Water Research Development and Innovation, or the RDI roadmap. And this roadmap envisions establishing South Africa as a leader among middle-income countries regarding the development and employment of specifically water management practices. Now, alongside its commitment to technology and innovation in the water sector, the roadmap states that it aims to improve basic services with a particular emphasis on delivering water and sanitation services. So that's not all. The roadmap also provides vital considerations and guidance concerning the uptake of innovations, as can be seen on this slide. And the policies and strategies, it doesn't end there. Another legal instrument that's integral to this water discourse is the National Water Resource Strategy of 2013, or the NWRS. And it strongly encourages the use of technological innovations for its potential to contribute to efficient and effective water management solutions that responds to the needs of water security and sustainability for individuals, communities, productive and strategic water use, as well as ecosystem services. Importantly to me, though, the NWRS also states that all water infrastructure must be value engineered against the life cycle cost thereof, and that evidence must be proffered to substantiate that the technical design of such infrastructure is appropriate and that the maintenance and operation thereof are reasonable and within the institution's capability. Now, from this, one may gather that technologies aimed at solving water challenges, again, should be context-specific and appropriate and provide sustainable solutions and be affordable. Then lastly, here we have the National E-Strategy. And according to it, resolving the challenge of managing utilities such as water is actually a critical issue that must be addressed as part of the planning process focused on introducing a primarily information and communication technology-enabled plan for the government to accelerate change. Now, the strategy links ICTs, or information and communication technologies, with the key deliverables of the different spheres of government. For instance, to resolve the problem of managing water, the National E-Strategy proposes that smart solutions should be introduced to support the efficient management of utility infrastructure, as well as modernizing the utility services provided through such infrastructure. And it also suggests that state reform and improving the role of state-owned companies, ICT infrastructure, and water infrastructure is absolutely necessary. Now, as such, we can see the current water policy requires the use of technology and innovation to solve pressing issues pertaining to water service delivery. But regarding the uptake of water technologies and innovations in South Africa, several concerns persist. While I would like to delve very deep into this, I'll just say that a primary consideration, according to research regarding the uptake of innovation in the public sector in South Africa, is the capabilities or lack thereof of the officials and the maturity of organizations to identify, learn, and implement innovations in the city context. So, additionally, they are required to share knowledge regarding innovations with the necessary stakeholders to promote the diffusion of innovation at all government levels, and this is not necessarily done. Very interesting is that we have something called the Municipal Innovation Maturity Index, or the MMI, And this is a tool that's developed to assess municipalities' capability to support service delivery innovation. And the MMI results indicate a marginal increase, and this was revealed in the general innovation maturity of municipalities. And it says that although municipalities were aware of and understood innovations relating to basic service delivery, they have yet to reach a stage where innovation principles are embedded in their institutions. So one may determine that while there may be water innovations available, as we have heard today, challenges persist in the water sector, and one of these reasons are likely due to the lack of innovative solutions being incorporated by municipalities, as indicated by the MMI. So while there's a lot to be said about this, I would quickly like to move on to intelligent water management technologies as an innovative.
Clean. You have 5 minutes left.
Oh my goodness. Okay, thank you. So yes, this is a concept I worked on during my PhD research. Yeah, just note the remarks on the slide here as to why I've used the word intelligent. And I would like to provide a conceptualization of it briefly and present ways in which it could be used. So intelligent water management technologies, or an intelligent water management network, utilizes smart infrastructure such as sensors, smart valves, smart pipes, and smart pumps, in addition to information and communication technology, or ICTs, and the Internet of Things, IoT, integration. This actually allows for automation, data communication, big data development, data management, data fusion, analysis, and prediction tools. So intelligent water management technologies actually cover many categories of technological innovation in the water system, such as real-time monitoring and automation, decision support, network planning, operational readiness, and advanced analytics. And so it's more than just smart technologies or smart solutions. Smart solutions are often infrastructural in nature, but yes. So to me, the main approach to understanding intelligent water management technologies or networks is actually to view it as consisting of layers. And there's actually more on this on the slide. But at the minimum, these layers comprises 5 layers, namely a physical layer, control and sensing layer, a collection and communications layer, a data management and display layer, and a data fusion and analysis layer. Now, this layered architecture, when I discovered this, was for me very important because it allows one to isolate certain technologies or scientific disciplines from intelligent water management technologies. And arguably, this allows for an in-depth analysis of each technology that contributes to the deeper and holistic understanding of intelligent water management technologies. And I would like to delve deeper into this. But yes, one can identify smart water infrastructure, ICTs, the IoT, data science, and big data as technologies and scientific disciplines forming a part of intelligent water management technologies, and each of these form part of those different layers. But considering all of this, how could intelligent water management technologies be utilized to address specific water service delivery provision challenges? So for the sake of brevity, and because I only have 20 minutes, I looked at the challenge of non-revenue water. Now, a big component of non-revenue water is physical leaks, which result in major water losses. And water utilities are able to, for instance, use ICTs such as wireless or mobile networks to obtain thousands of meter readings at different time intervals, ranging from hourly or even every 10 seconds during the day. And this innovation allows for increased accuracy in water consumption measurements, and leaks at the consumer side of the meter can be identified by analyzing consumption profiles. And when and if an irregularity occurs, the water provider will be alerted immediately. So the water utility has direct and remote access to smart meters, fault detection and water meters, etc. And those such fault detection can also occur much earlier. A very interesting component is that intelligent water management technology also has the potential for detecting illegal water connections by utilizing AI algorithms. And these AI algorithms could form a part of the system envisioned above, especially since the increased frequency of data collected from smart water meters may enable the algorithm to function with more accuracy. So the use of AI in this regard stems from the use of both data science and big data. And while I delve deeper into how this is done, I should probably get to my conclusions and findings. Now, to me, in this investigation, I found that, of course, there was ample policy vision concerning the uptake of technology and innovation in cities that is actually aimed at addressing water service delivery challenges. But the country's primary water service delivery related laws are silent on the issue. The policy strategies and plans that have been adopted are ultimately directed at obviously fulfilling the legislative commitments in the Constitution, the Water Services Act and the National Water Act. But broadly speaking, these commitments relate to providing access to sufficient water to communities. But these policies actually seem to go above and beyond in an attempt to achieve the fulfillment of this commitment, particularly by emphasizing the need for technology and innovation to solve critical water service delivery challenges. And so a sort of disconnect seems to have to develop between the laws and the policies in this case. And it stresses the need for the development of legislation that actually establishes enforceable obligations. These obligations must be aligned with the policy vision relating to the implementation of technology and innovation in cities to fulfill their water services function. So we need the development of a strong legal framework that accompanies the current policy vision, and it's critical to ensure cities utilize technology and innovation to fulfill their function as water services providers and to ensure the fulfillment of the constitutional water right. So I actually recommend the development of legislation focused on two broad categories, the first of which entails that legislation should encourage the development, uptake, and use of technology and innovation in cities to improve water service delivery. And the second category entails the building and development of the internal or institutional and operational capacity of governments. But since I'm running out of time, I will be able to delve deeper into these categories, perhaps during the Q&A, or if anyone's interested, I can provide this information to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nicoline. You've certainly provided us with a lot of food for thought. Our final speaker of the day is Mr. Jay Bhagwan. Jay is the Executive Manager of the key strategic area of water use and waste management at the South African Water Research Commission, which focuses on the management of water and wastewater in the domestic and mining and industrial sectors. Jay has been instrumental in creating the portfolio of research projects and innovations related to water supply and wastewater management. He completed his master's degree in tropical public health engineering from the Leeds University in the United Kingdom. With his knowledge and experience gained in implementation of water and sanitation projects, he has played an incremental role in the shaping of national water policy and legislation. Welcome, Jay. We look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to everyone. Let me see if I can get the sharing working first. Let's get that. Okay, can you all see that? Can you all see my presentation?
Yes, Jay.
Yes.
Lovely. Okay, good afternoon. And, thank you for the opportunity. But I'm at a great disadvantage because all the speakers before me have actually taken the thunder of what I was going to talk about. So I'm going to improvise, and time is also not on my side because I also have a constraint. So let me improvise through this presentation I had sort of designed to respond, to this event and to basically this part of the session talking about how innovation can accelerate the right to access to water. And I think you all heard the story. This is from our own intelligence around, the water services institutional business health doesn't look, very great, as you would see that, in terms of estimation, 40% of our water service authorities are in extreme business vulnerability. And 38% of them are very, very high. And if you look at the map of these municipalities, you would find that a lot of them are, covering areas of the previous homelands, etc., areas or areas that where many of the communities were really marginalized in the previous dispensation. And if you go back and you unpack, and this has been mentioned, it's issues of revenue, weak finances, collection, poor financial management. Obviously, this what has been mentioned many times, poor O&M and management of assets, and that is topped together with the weak technical capacity, both in terms of the technical skills and the staffing numbers. Now, of course, this is a manifestation of many systemic issues that are there at the moment, that is resulting in though we have the highest, aspects of coverage, the reliability of the systems are quite vulnerable. And it's not something that has manifested over, the last 20 years of democracy. It's been there, and it's been sort of perpetuating for a very long time. And the real issue is what we don't talk about, okay? And the real issue gets ignored, that we're not a homogeneous society, and we continue to grow divided, and our current approaches continue to be perpetuated. And this is what we're ending up as a society, and our engineering and our innovation also drives this perpetuation of what is happening in our cities, in our towns, at present. So when you look at it, you ask, is it an issue of rights? Is it real or absolute? Because what's happening is that the poor and those off the grid in this country become invisible to the issues. And, we take the issue of a legislation or a policy like, the right to water, and we make it a garland, and we put it around, an old dispensation approach and an old colonial approach, and we think that everything is getting fixed, okay? And that this policy will drive that change, okay? So what we're saying is that, there is more challenges to this policy, okay, than there is around, the issue of what is happening on the ground. And I think this was echoed by the UN head last year, or this year, in fact, that the issue is that we haven't addressed the issue of inequality, and it's becoming a pandemic. And it's inequality right across in engineering, in innovation, in implementation, and many facets. And I think South Africa is a theater of how this is being played out, okay? And that going forward, we need a new social compact, for this new era around how we deal with this issue of inequality, because it's becoming pandemic, okay? And the result is, everyone knows about it, is it's, even our own legislations have the contradictions, the inconsistencies, the issues of entitlement and obligation, the water allocation reform hasn't kicked in because of it, the issues of equity is downplayed. So it's all this manifestation that continues to perpetuate the situation around the water services environment. And the UN offers a different perspective around the human right to water, but at the WRC, from an innovation and a research side, we see this as a human right issue in a cube challenge, that in South Africa, it's an issue of poverty, it's an issue of unemployment, and it's an issue of inequality. And how should we be using innovation to actually, deal with this challenge, through the opportunity we have as scientists and innovators in the system that changes this cube, and gives it the opportunity that stimulates growth, that stimulates competitiveness, and stimulates prosperity that's, relates to that aspect of human right and equity. Now, let's take our own engineering environments and what we do, and this is what I talk about, the perpetuation. When you take a suburb, you get the gold standard. When you take a little informal community or a low-income community, you give them the whole standard. Okay, and this carries on that we have two sets of standards and guidelines in engineering in this country that continues to build this wall around how we've been approaching these things. So I'm going to take you through something, rather than talking about theory, of really a case of how the WRC is looking at changing that future through introducing a new sanitation environment and a new sanitation economy that tackles the issue of human right and tries to work towards equitable sanitation by influencing the technology environment. And we have this program called Sanity, the Sanitation Transformation Initiative, that it's driving cutting-edge disruptive solutions that would bring equitable solutions right across the different levels of income, etc. That there won't be a waterborne for rich and a hole in the ground for a poor, but it will apply right across and while doing that, it will stimulate a whole new circular economy that will ensure that there's value in human resource in terms of unpacking a new, what you would call economy chain in the sector, and where the opportunity comes through seeing it as a resource. It can reduce water use, it can reduce energy use, it can produce energy, you can get chemicals, protein, lipids, etc. It's a hive of opportunity that hasn't been tapped, that can change those equations around the whole human rights issue. And it's beginning to happen where in the world we are leading, and in some of the areas where we've introduced a 1 liter flush toilet. And that means that if we break the barrier of a half a liter that we're working towards, we can take sanitation completely off the grid. And we don't have to have any sewers and flushes and wastewater treatment. And the equity then comes straight into where we can provide this in many areas that do not have water, as an example. Now I'm going to jump to the ICT and the 4th industrial revolution, and I think it was covered much better than me. But until now, we've saw ICT in our country as controlling poor people. Prepaid meters, advanced metering has had that kind of approach. But where we're heading to is in the direction of bidirectional communication. That it empowers society to be part of the value of managing water. So getting it away from this kind of connotation we had over the last 20 years and putting it into an environment that offers the bidirectional communication that empowers the individual is where it is going. And through that smart solutions, we're going to see a whole lot of better valuing of water and services and more participation by tapping that. And that's where the equity and the rights issue starts unplaying in a better way. And we're seeing that with water quality monitoring. And I think Karen touched on the stuff of how we transition that to building citizen science tools, that citizens also become part of monitoring water quality in a more useful way with the regulators and etc. And then there's the whole area, beyond technical to social innovation areas that we can tackle, to deal with some of the symptoms that we have at the moment around service delivery. And here's a good example of something we're driving around multiple use systems, where we tackle the innovation at a community level, that moves the system to self-supply, recognizing that the municipal and the institutional model in many rural areas does not work. We need to move away from this very colonial, centralized kind of approach to more realistic and get community enterprises established to bring greater sustainability. And here's a good demonstrator we have of 11 villages in Limpopo that is showing that that is possible, because we're thinking out of the box, and it's bringing a lot of prosperity in that area. And then just on operation and maintenance, there's another area that we've been pushing and leading globally around social franchising, and it's nothing different from a McDonald's process, but it goes to the bottom of the pyramid. And we've tackled the issue of operation and maintenance of school sanitation in the Eastern Cape that brought dignity and better servicing to school sanitation that was never there. And it all built on building local enterprises to create a market that brings that dignity and what you would call human right to the service that is offered. So I will stop there. Like I said, I'd improvise and just leave you with a thought from Nelson Mandela. It says that it's always impossible until it's done. And as innovators, we should keep pushing the boundaries, to make sure that whatever we do drives away inequality that is, quite prone in our current environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jay. You've certainly raised a lot of complex thoughts and ideas surrounding the interface between access to water and technology. I'd like to open the floor now for questions. I see that there's already one question. So Nicoline, if you can join us.
Hi.
Okay, so the first question goes out to Nicoline. Chantal asks, how can cities optimize intelligent water management technologies, given that adopting such innovations may be a new practice in these cities? And then I have a question for both Jay and Nicoline. Nicoline, after you answer, Jay can answer the question. So my question is, beyond merely improving access to water, how can we utilize intelligent water management technologies to add to the efforts that are necessary in improving overall water security? Sorry. For example, for disaster risk reduction or management, or for protecting aquatic systems and climate change adaptation. So we leave with those questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melandri. Okay, so in terms of the first question, I would recommend that cities should adopt policies and guidelines regarding the uptake of innovations to optimize the uptake, obviously, of intelligent water management technologies in these cities, and that such policies and guidelines should provide clarity as to the innovation life cycle, including what should occur during each stage thereof. And to me, this is, there are different stages. So it's like the inventory or discovery phase, the development phase, the maturation of the innovation, and the ultimate retention or phasing out of the invention. And these also relate to my question earlier to Karen, the fact that we don't have guidelines as to data quality and integrity. So there's a similar connection here, or a link for me when it comes to implementing innovations in cities. So to my mind, these guidelines that I do have in mind, I think they should touch on various factors such as resource allocation, the need for agile supply chain management processes, facilities, and infrastructure that's necessary to enable the uptake of innovations, and the need for global cooperation, developing the requisite enabling culture as well, and also the necessary leadership and management support structures. And then we also need competent and aptly skilled staff, of course, in this regard. And to my mind, these instruments should speak to aspects cities should cities should consider while determining whether certain technological innovations are appropriate in accordance with their needs and capacity, provide for detailed guidelines concerning integral steps in successfully implementing innovations such as test beds and the scaling up of technologies, etc. So yes, that is an answer to Chantal's question. And just briefly, the question you've posed, Malandri, thank you very much for that. I think while it's not exactly intelligent water management technologies, as I've said, these technologies, as per my conceptualization thereof, consist of a variety of technologies. So ICTs, IoTs, smart tech solutions, big data, data science, and this allows for predictive analytics, the use of AI, etc. Now, when you consider this, this is already being done, for instance, in climate change adaptation, and our national climate change adaptation strategy provides for these climate services that actually use a vast amount of these technologies that form a part of the intelligent water management technologies. And that is specifically used to address things like water security, drought management, and disaster risk management, etc. So I think we are well on our way in terms of planning for it. And specifically in the climate arena, there actually are real world applications and implementations that are already being done. So that's it from me.
Okay, should I go?
Yes, please, Jay.
Yeah, so look, we've also adopted and harnessed, the smart water management paradigm. But there's several what you would call lenses to it. The one easy lens is the technical efficiencies that they bring. But the other lens is it's a whole change around an institutional and a governance paradigm. Okay, and the smart water transition allows us to deal with that, the symptoms that we have currently, and transition us into a better space, because the digital space offers us more transparency and flexibility around fixing some of the symptoms for the long term. And the institutional change also then moves us away from a purely engineering paradigm, which is dominant in municipalities, because that's one of the tension, is that, everyone wants to dig a pipe, but the business is transitioning, and it allows us to do that adequately in terms of the management, but then also opens up the opportunity for a new market of services and products that becomes, quite essential in driving forward. So that is our view in seeing that this is where the opportunity lies, and within that there are all the other benefits of technical efficiencies and optimization, etc. And they collectively contribute to the bigger picture in transitioning, the whole institutional environment into greater sustainability. I hope I've answered that adequately.
Certainly, thank you, Jay, and thank you for your interventions also, Nicoline. I will pose Prof. Anal du Plessis' question to you, Jay, and afterwards I'll allow Karen to ask her question, and then we can wrap up the quick Q&A. Okay, so Prof. Anal du Plessis asks, Jay, you mentioned the creation of a market towards the end of the presentation. Do we need to be concerned about potential cost or competition implications? And I'll allow now Karen to ask the question.
Thank you very much. I actually have both a comment and a question. Firstly, I am really, really happy to see that one of my pet projects of trying to advance as hard as I can the use of alternative sanitation technologies in an urban context is also a torch picked up by the Water Research Commission, because I really do think that alternative sanitation is the solution for the future, and we should de-link having water and sanitation linked and always think in terms of we need to have a water-based sanitation system. It's scientifically wrong because we are breaking the nitrate cycle, and it's also not very good for a climate change, from a climate change perspective, to have waterborne sanitation and large-scale sewage systems like we currently do. Then in terms of my comment on Nicoline's presentation is, when we started with our innovations and our technology that we brought to the water sector, we met with this one large obstacle that I always have found in the water sector ever since I started in it, and that is the disparity and the resistance of the old guard in the water sector to change. And you will find that the younger employees, the Gen Zs and the millennials, they know about technology, they want to use it, and they are the ones who have to use it, interpreting data, making graphs. But the older guys sitting in the decision-making positions, who has the power to direct their investment towards these technologies, are extremely resistant to it. And for example, when we used our Water Monster app and we said, you just give the municipal guy who takes the sample this app on his cell phone, then they said to us, no, but you can't give these samplers cell phones, they will steal it. And so you must understand that in the water sector, that there's a traditional resistance to change, and that the technology users are not the ones with the power to make decisions regarding technology. And that's a big bridge to overcome, and we can only overcome it through proper education. But the people who needs to be educated are the ones who ask their children to put the app on their cell phone. So it's quite difficult.
Okay, so let me answer Anel's question. And Anel, we've been doing work in this area, and through tips, what we're finding that we buy 80% of our technology and products from outside South Africa. Okay, and as you know, amongst the leading what you would call water innovators in the world, we amongst the top 30. We do not use our own innovations, and a lot of it gets outside and we buy it back. So give you an example, we were the pioneers in cross-flow microfiltration membranes. Graham Tech, etc., were the leaders in the world. We created no opportunity and market in South Africa for that innovation. Singapore bought it and turned it into one of the biggest industries in the world. Okay, now this is where our policy and the problem is that we do not force and encourage the public sector as the first enabler to support local innovations, and stimulate local industry. So, the white paper, what you would call the DTI white paper of 2017, for the first time, we introduced a chapter on water and sanitation industrialization. Have a read at it. It's 5 areas. One of it is new sanitation, and we're working and with the world leaders, working closely with the Gates Foundation in developing and innovating, amongst the world's first off-grid sanitation systems. And it's coming on the back of creating an aspirational solution for the poor, but it will apply to everyone in the world, and it will take sanitation off the grid. And on the back of that pathway, it's being designed for a whole industrialization program. So you could have a look at the program that we are running called SASTEP, the South African Sanitation Technology Enterprise Program, of how we're trying to shape a new sanitation market and industry in South Africa that would service our own challenges. And that's the problem. You know, we have many water challenges in the country, but we don't use our innovation potential to create an industry and a market to service it. We're importing it from somewhere else. So just to answer that, you know, of course, there's cost and competition implications, but if you want to create, you know, the first solutions, you have to invest and carry the potential cost that gives you the front runner advantage and then makes you globally competitive in becoming a net exporter of those products and solutions. So that is how we're seeing the shift in the, you know, the more larger, you know, South African environment that would encourage and I think somebody mentioned bring legislative requirements for municipalities to adopt at least one innovative solutions every year. And I think we're seeing presidency pushing in that direction to start enforcing that pathway is observed. Yeah, so I agree with Karen's comments. I mean, I can't add any more to that to say that, look, where we are and what we are and the situation where we are, the only way we can get out of it is to start being more innovative and start being more bold in trying and allowing these innovations in our backyard. Otherwise, our local innovators will never get a chance in heaven to take these products, you know, to the scales they want to. So, you know, like Karen said, you know, it's like the old boys club that keeps people out. I mean, there's many, I could take many examples where, you know, in many of the rural areas, all our wastewater treatments are Rolls-Royce systems. That's why they're failing. Okay, and we had this big push, you know, of putting very expensive and highly costly systems in our rural areas. Then we go and complain why they're failing because there is no capacity and skill to operate and maintain them. You know, you wouldn't even find it in the metros. And we have this disparity in our system that we need to start understanding that it's quite, and many things need to change in our standards, in our guidelines, in our approaches that would bring a more equitable and a more sustainable, you know, service environment going forward. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Jay, and thank you very much for the question, Karen. I will now hand over to Prof. Anel du Plessis to do the final remarks and closing. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Melandri. Colleagues, we've been busy for long and I do not intend keeping you for much longer. Michael, Jock, who I see already had to leave us, Karen, Jay, and Nicoline, thank you very, very much. I think what I enjoyed most of today is that we are solution oriented. We sit with a water provision challenge in South Africa and it's a huge one. But all of you have looked at possible solutions and at ways in which we can make this work. And I am so encouraged by the expertise we still have in the country at the level of policy and legal analyses, as well as at the level of engineering and deep and science-based research. It's my hope that the participants learned something. I think if you didn't, then you should be writing books about this topic. It's fresh, it's new, it's novel. Definitely in need of further research, case study-based research, I would think. And I do hope that we can keep this conversation going. We don't have enough people doing research on water law, water governance, and water management in the country. And I see that we have quite a few students also with us this afternoon, and I do hope that you also feel inspired taking the research agenda forward. Thank you once again to everyone. I wish you a good weekend. Please stay safe, and for those who can, please get vaccinated. Thank you very much. Until next time.